What's going on?
How's it going?
It's going good. Going good.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to be here as well in a different area.
Yeah.
Different format this week. We're going to go ahead and just do an audio version with the holidays around and Christmas and New Year's and everything. It's a little hard to schedule a time where we could both be at the place. So this is a lot more convenient for us. So there won't be a video portion for this episode for those that are watching on YouTube.
And it's an excuse to drink beer before 12 o'clock.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, you get to drink a beer. Speaking of beer, what beer of the week do we have before we jump into this episode? I'm actually interested in this one.
So we have a Magic Hat. So it's a Magic Hat Brewery.
Okay.
The beer is an IPA called Wandering But Not Lost. And it is from Vermont.
Oh, is it? All right.
Where Bernie Sanders is the senator.
There's a lot of good things you could tie into the Magic Hat. Like Bernie always has a Magic Hat he's trying to pull policies out of and say he's trying to fight.
That's true. He's wandering but not lost.
He's wandering, but he's not lost.
It says on the back of the beer, the journey is the destination. And Bernie has been running for like 8 years now as president.
Yeah.
So
he has had a long journey.
Yeah, for sure.
This is his last shot, though. He's like 78 years old or something. He's crazy.
This may be beyond his last shot.
His last shot was last time.
Yeah.
That's a good one, though. So it's from Vermont?
Yeah, it's a Vermont IPA. The brewery's up there. It's actually from Burlington, where he was the mayor. Even better.
Is it really? Wow.
Yes. Magic Hat Brewing Company in Burlington, Vermont.
I don't think that could have been more perfect. I'm actually a little annoyed I don't get to try it right now.
No, so actually, I was at my friend's, and his girlfriend had been at a fundraiser for work, and she brought back some beer, and I saw it sitting there. I was like, I need this. How much do I have to pay you to take this?
That's actually perfect, man. That's definitely your best beer of the week so far.
Yeah, this is a good one. Burlington, Vermont IPA. Bernie Sanders.
How many do you have?
I only had 2. I got one for you and one for me.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to pick it up later at work or something.
I'll save it.
There we go. Oh, save it for the UFC fight coming up.
Yeah, I will. When we're going to, we have this colleague named Lee Byers.
Who?
And Lee Byers.
Oh, yeah, Lee.
Yeah, and he only drinks craft beer. So I'll bring him this craft beer. I'll bring him one and you one.
In honor of the Connor fight. That works.
Yep.
I definitely want to try it. I'm excited. So that was a A+ in that beer of the week. Good job. It was better than some previous selections for sure.
I've had Bernie Sanders themed beers now.
That's funny. Yeah. So in case anyone was wondering, last week or last episode, what we discussed was the Joe Biden candidacy. This week will be Bernie, which will probably be a little bit more convincing from my perspective, just because I tend to line up more with Bernie than I do with Biden. So apologies to any Biden supporters with the last episode and how hard I might have gone in on him. Yeah. So Bernie Sanders, he is actually someone for me that I was not familiar with, obviously, until after the election. I never even really paid much attention to him while he was running because I wasn't really following the Democratic portion of the run. I was following the Republican side much more because that tended to be where most of my circles were. So Bernie Sanders is actually very new to me, at least over the last year and a half, where I've had to look into his candidacy. But it was actually the opposite for you. You were actually kind of, what were you doing during the election? Were you actively supporting
Hillary?
This
is funny. So obviously the primary was in 2016. So the state right below Carolina, it was like the third primary state in 2016. Sure. So it was pretty important.
Yeah.
So I was looking for my next kind of campaign. Sure. And I actually took a position with the Bernie Sanders campaign in South Carolina for 1 week.
Really?
And I was actually, 1 week. Wow. And I was I did not fit in with the culture of the people who work for Bernie Sanders.
In what way? Let's dig into this. I'm curious.
Any stereotype you've had about a Bernie bro, it's real.
That's fun.
We were their headquarters. Yeah, their headquarters was in a house that didn't have any heat, and it's the middle of winter. And I was like, I can't. And then I quit, and then I worked. Yep, and then I worked for Hillary Clinton.
So you flipped because of the building and environment. That's interesting.
Yeah. I just didn't see there was no way to network, I guess, and climb the ladder. And at that time, that's
Oh,
what
I
I
see.
wanted to do.
Oh, so it's more like individually for you is more there wasn't a clear path forward, and it looked like
Yeah,
yeah,
which
that
is
makes
it says something about the candidates, the people that were working for Bernie at that level, at that grassroots level, were not
yeah,
really political people. So they were going to do this, and that was it. The people working for Hillary, they were
career
in politics. Like that
politicians.
was
Yeah,
that was their profession.
that's actually a good point. So I'm just now listening to Bernie Sanders' book he wrote. I don't even know what the heck the name is. It's one of the more recent ones he wrote. That thrust him into being a millionaire, God forbid. And he
Yeah.
he goes in very great detail, probably too much for my liking, about kind of like how the start of their campaign happened. I mean, I'm in chapter 7, and we're just getting to the point now where he's saying he announced his presidency, and it's really interesting information from someone like me who didn't follow a lot of this stuff. It kind of helps me see from his perspective what was happening during that time. So it's pretty interesting. But one of the things he did say was there was no like pre-structure or framework that they had in place before he was running his presidency, whereas Hillary Clinton had, all of that and more. It was very, very established. I mean, it was essentially as rigged in her favor as much as possible, and I don't mean rigged in necessarily just a negative sense, but just in the sense that she had so much structural put down in the first place, whereas he relied a lot on kind of that house with no heat and people just trying to do this a one-time thing type of scenario. It's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he's been doing that his whole life, his
Yeah,
whole career.
that's the thing. Like, so listening to his book, so he was, for those that don't know, he really, his kind of just quick bullet points were he was a mayor in Burlington, Vermont. Then he switched to being a congressman out of Vermont. I could have this wrong, but I think he was the first independent congressman, maybe out of Vermont, but maybe in the country. I can't remember. There was something that I was looking up, but
Yeah, because he was in the U.S. House for several years. Yes, he
yeah,
was. He was the first independent elected to the U.S. House of Representatives.
yeah,
For like the last 40 years when that happened in
yeah.
1988.
That's what it was. Yeah, it was like pretty unprecedented. Not that that's an uncommon word to use for what he had his career has been, but so he went from being a mayor to an independent congressman to a U.S. senator in like 2004, I think, is when it was. So that's kind of been his career. But I mean, throughout that whole time, yeah, he has been an independent, so he's had to kind of fight whatever systems were already in place and rely on a lot of grassroots enthusiasm to get where he's gotten for sure. That's not unusual for him.
No.
Um, but yeah, that's funny. So how long were you working on Hillary's campaign for? Like how long did that last to the end, or was it just a short?
So it was probably 3 or 4 months up through the South Carolina primary, and then another month after that for the North Carolina primary. And so this is why I quit politics. I worked for Hillary in North Carolina, but in the primary, I voted for Bernie Sanders.
Interesting. So, oh wow. So let me get this straight. Let's take two steps back
Yes.
now. I need to figure
Yep.
this out. What caused you to want to work on the Bernie campaign at first before you ended up having a change of heart after a week?
Because he was a candidate I supported. I didn't.
You lined up with him more, like
Yes,
ideologically? Okay.
just policy wise.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
And I wasn't. Obviously, Trump was not Trump yet.
Yeah,
He was
yeah,
on
yeah.
the way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So at this time, I was like, it's gonna be like Marco Rubio,
I
maybe
gotcha.
Ted
Yeah.
Cruz. So I
Yeah.
was like, Bernie, like, Hillary's probably just gonna win this whole thing anyway. It's
Yeah,
gonna be
yeah.
pretty easy for him.
So might as well
So
choose the weak side. Yeah, I got you.
yeah, so I just worked in the mayoral race in Charlotte, and the thing I don't like about campaigns is like go go go, and
Yeah,
it just stops, and then it's
yeah,
and so I was sitting
yeah.
around. I was like, I had met some people that were working on Bernie's campaign, and I kind of lined up with them, and I went to they had a debate. I think I went to the debate in South Carolina that they had at a college, and
Oh,
I
cool.
helped do the staging for Bernie, and like MSNBC was there and all that. And I spent the day with these people, and I was like, this is not for me. These are
Yeah.
not my people. They're I don't want to
What's
disparage
funny?
them because I still support Bernie Sanders, but
No, but it's funny because I've always had this weird tension about that as well. Is like where I line up ideologically. Why can I not say that word?
yeah,
Ideologically.
ideological. Is that
Yeah,
it?
this is an
No,
embarrassing moment, but whatever. Yeah,
edit that
go
out.
with that. We'll edit that. We'll just have a long 10-second bleep.
Yep.
But where I line up politically speaking is much more on the Bernie Sanders side. But when I don't actually know anyone personally, other than maybe you, that is where I'm at politically. I'd say 99% of people I know and hang out with are not where I'm at for the most part. And so anytime I've kind of bumped shoulders with people who are similar to me politically, like the Bernie wing, I mean, I'm kind of like, I don't really like this dynamic I'm seeing. There's something about it that annoys me. So that's funny you say that. I'm sure I would have had a kind of a similar reaction.
Yeah, it's just people. Uh, what kind of, how do I say this? The people that have time to just go to South Carolina in the middle of the day on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way.
That's funny. Yeah, I see that's what annoys me. And this is the problem with the Bernie. This is why I didn't originally like him, and I've studied through it to where I understand it more and do like him more, but I still have this weird reservation when it comes to his followers. But there is a certain type of people I can see that he would attract that aren't the most informed and well educated. They just hear, well, billionaires are bad, therefore I'm on his team, and that kind of gut reaction of like, well, yeah, screw the rich, billionaires are bad, Bernie's gonna go get them, let's go with Bernie, yada yada. And it's not really like a studied conclusion. It's just kind of like a knee-jerk reaction conclusion. I don't like knee-jerk reaction conclusions for any political position, let alone the knee-jerk reactions for the political position I hold to, that I feel like there's actually legitimate reasons behind. Being around people that just have that kind of just, they don't have a nuanced approach to it. It's just kind of a very simplistic approach to it. It annoys me to no end. I can't stand it.
Yeah, and I think that his supporters are definitely the most progressive part of the Democratic Party, and some aren't even members of it. He's not technically a Democrat.
Technically, yeah. It's kind of funny.
So that's the whole thing. But he also kind of brought people in. He has a coalition of people who weren't necessarily passionate about politics, I think, before he jumped in 2016. I remember when he announced, it was like, oh, like I knew who he was. Like I always agreed with what he had to say, but I was like, there's no shot. Like Hillary's just going to steamroll him. This is going to be no contest.
Yeah.
And then they come out of Iowa and she wins by like half a point.
Yeah.
Like,
that's crazy. And didn't he win New Hampshire? I haven't actually looked into it too much. But...
I think it was pretty close. So we probably should talk about the 2016 Democratic primary. We have before.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you take a lot of lead on this because, like I said just a second ago, I really followed the Republican end of the 2016 election a lot more than the Democratic. So I'm actually I'm just now getting into what happened on the Democratic side of the 2016. So definitely you could take the lead in kind of how that unfolded and what direction you're about to go.
Yeah. So Hillary jumped in. I remember what happened because the day before was like Hillary Clinton has a special announcement. Like, what could it be?
Surprise.
Yeah. So that was in April. That's in April of 2015. She announces this pretty cool commercial, whatever. Yeah. Hillary Clinton, and then Bernie jumps in a month later. It's like, okay, who is this guy? Like I said, if you followed politics, you'd probably seen him on the circuit.
Sure.
He's been in Congress since the 80s or 90s, and was a senator since 2007.
Yeah.
And he kind of jumps in, and you're like, okay, whatever. But then we get to Iowa, and Hillary wins by half a point. No, 0.3%.
Wow. Damn.
And then he wins New Hampshire.
Damn.
And she barely wins Nevada, and she cleans up in South Carolina, a lot of African Americans. And at that point, going into Super Tuesday, everyone's like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah, people were surprised. That's crazy.
Yeah, and so it was – and this is what's going to happen this time is he was not going to go down without a fight. I think he's going to take it to the convention this time as well. And she ends up winning most of the Super Tuesday states, but then we get the thing with the super delegates, and we've talked about this.
Yeah.
And the convention, the debate questions, the email leaks, kind of the WikiLeaks saying that the Democratic Party supported her over him. I don't want to say rigging, but definitely influencing it in her favor.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, and that was one of the things that listening to his book that I thought was interesting because I am getting caught up in a lot of this, and he said it just didn't. One of the things that convinced him to run, because he honestly didn't want to run. He had said like 2 years beforehand, and I guess everyone kind of says this, but he had said a couple years before that he had an interview and he's like, look, there's 99% chance I am not running for president. And then he said one of the things that convinced him to is he really didn't like how the Democratic Party was essentially from the get-go circling themselves around this one individual and not just trusting the democratic process to select an individual, that they were throwing their weight completely and utterly behind one person at the expense of anyone else that wanted to. And that was just, in his mind, unacceptable. And so once he realized there weren't very many people that were going to challenge that, that was one of the factors that caused him to want to run. And it is, I mean, from the news I was digesting and hearing at the time from the right side about what was happening on the left, man, it was brutal. I mean, this is one of the reasons Hillary has a very bad uh, reputation, to say the least, on the right side. Is it just seems like she was willing to do whatever to win at all costs and to put on this front of purity almost, while behind the scenes she plays extremely dirty, and she kind of represents to the right what the swamp is: a career politician who doesn't play fair behind the scenes but has a straight face in front of the camera type of thing. And so when all this broke out about what they did to Bernie under her, kind of in her favor, it really didn't look very well. I mean, not that anyone loved Bernie on the right, but I mean, it still just kind of showed who she was from a right perspective in some ways.
And I told you this last night. So I'm reading this book called The Destruction of Hillary Clinton. And basically the thesis is, like, she wasn't always this hated. Like, what happened in the last 2 years, or, well, I guess 4 or 5 years now, but what happened in the last couple of years that changed her? Because she never really had negatives that she did. And
Sure.
you know, she was the first lady. She actually worked for healthcare in the 90s. And then she was a senator. Then she was she runs against Obama. She's Secretary of State. Like, she's never this disliked until she gets through this primary. And I think those email leaks started, and then Trump just pummels her.
Yeah, I mean, so this is not a take that I might be wrong on this, but again, I grew up in a lot of conservative circles, and I mean, I can remember from being very young that the Clinton name it was like a curse word in the family, or not my family, but just in the family culture of conservatism. That was a normal thing, because there was before Trump came, there's a very large belief that the Clintons would do pretty shady things behind the scenes and just get away with it without any issues. I mean, I grew up a lot of my life in Missouri, and Bill Clinton obviously was in Arkansas. I shouldn't say a lot of my life. A lot of my family and a lot of my roots go back to Missouri. And there was a lot of talk about when Bill Clinton was in Arkansas, some of the stuff he got away with while he was there.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, most of it was probably conspiracy theories. I don't know. But I mean, it still was rooted pretty deeply that the Clintons would do things, get away with it, and move on. And so they kind of represented the career politician who couldn't be touched. And the whole Clinton Foundation thing, there was a lot of criticism.
The Clinton Foundation.
Yeah. So these aren't things like I've ever taken the time to look into, so I don't even really have an opinion on any of it. But I do remember growing up hearing a lot about how they were very corrupt and could get away with it. And then you had all this stuff unfold under Obama's presidency with Benghazi and the emails, and a lot of stuff unfold to where, I mean, there was a constant buildup that, yeah, Trump kind of burst the bubble with hatred for her in some ways, but honestly, I remember hearing some shady stuff about them growing up for a long, long, long time. So I think I know plenty of people that were like, man, is this really going to be a Bush versus Clinton election again? I'm so tired of this. Do we really have like a dynasty of families that we can't get anyone else's name up in there? So I don't know. I'd be interested to kind of hear what you have to say after you read that book completely. But I find that there was quite a bit of hatred even before she was there.
So yeah, I think that happens anytime you're around for as long as the Clintons have been. But I mean, I voted for Hillary in 2016. I was happy to do so. And now that the more time has passed, and like just the stuff that's happened, the information that's come out, some of her comments, the book she wrote after the election, etc., it's like, just go away.
Yeah.
Like, your time is over. And that's why I think I definitely didn't foresee myself like disliking her this much, 3 years removed from the election.
Yeah. No, and see, I try to hold my opinions pretty reserved if I haven't looked into an issue. And Hillary Clinton is just one I'm starting to try to study and understand, because I feel like obviously it's important in our time, not because she's going to have any future in politics necessarily, but just to understand kind of the recent political history. And to me, some of the stuff she's been saying the last 3 years is she's just an extremely sore loser, man. She tries to blame everything. I haven't heard any comments where she held herself accountable for, I could have done this differently. It's always Bernie, Russian propaganda, the half the country's deplorables. There's always some type of scapegoat that she seems to be blaming towards, and it's just it's just there's nothing about her that I've heard yet that makes me be like, yeah, I could have supported her. Like there's just very, very little about her that seems appealing. But again, I've probably scratched the surface in terms of what I should look into and compared
And
to what I have.
yeah, and I think this is a similar problem with Joe Biden. I think he's a little. I don't think people like hate Joe Biden like they hate Hillary
No,
Clinton.
yeah,
But that same thing of like the party is kind of centered on this one
yeah,
individual. Like, why is it him? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Just a career
yeah.
politician kind of deal.
Yeah, and this is actually going back to why I actually think, and this might surprise you, but I actually think there's a lot of overlap between the appeal of Bernie Sanders and the original appeal of Donald Trump. I actually think
Yes.
there's quite a bit. I was listening to, because in this audio book I have for Bernie Sanders' book, it's kind of cool. They put in his announcement for presidency or some of his other speeches he's done. They like put it in the audiobook so I get to hear it. And I listened to Bernie Sanders when he said he was going to announce when he announced his presidency, and then I went just out of curiosity to Donald Trump's and listened to a portion of that.
Uh,
And they had very similar themes in regards to, like, Donald Trump straight up said, like, hey, part of the Washington's broke, the politicians are all bought by the lobbyists. He's like, and I would know, I pay lobbyists and I can get any politician to do whatever I want just through the lobbyists, because that's how the system works. And so none of them are fighting in your interest, they're fighting in special interest and corporations interest, and I'm going to go in and break that up. And that's what he was saying, which was exactly what Bernie was saying. Now, it was interesting though, because Donald Trump said, this system's so bad that you guys need a great leader, a wonderful leader. Only one leader can do this, and the leader that can do this is the one who wrote Art of the Deal. Like he's puffing himself up.
well, he didn't
It was,
write it, but
yeah, yeah, and his solution was that, and Bernie Sanders, on the contrast, it was very interesting, and you can take this for what it is. He said, look, yeah, after going through the same spiel, they went through the same spiel of special interest, corporation, lobbyists. Bernie Sanders said, "Hey, this election is not about Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush, or any other politician. It's about the American people and trying to get them what they deserve, and how we need to galvanize behind certain ideas and change and have a revolution." And he went on his whole spiel there. But it was interesting the different kind of solution they both had in light of, they diagnosed the problem the same in a way, but the solution was a little bit different. So it was pretty interesting.
yeah,
But
and I think so. When Bernie ran for mayor of Burlington in 1980, something to that effect, 81 maybe.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That was his whole message that he had running for president was the exact thing then, just on
yeah,
a smaller scale. So that the
exactly.
incumbent mayor was too in bed with the local businesses
Yeah,
and development companies and stuff like that, and he wasn't working for you. He was basically just a Republican light. And so
yeah,
Bernie primaried out an incumbent mayor and wins by 10 votes.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you see that parallel from 1980 all the way through 2016 with Hillary Clinton
Very true.
in a similar situation where he tries to primary out the establishment and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
establishment tries to, buck against that. And you saw them buck
See,
against that with the DNC and all that stuff.
100%, and that's very similar to what happened with Donald Trump and the Republican. Is the establishment Republicans got behind Jeb Bush initially. He kind of faltered, didn't do anything.
Hmm.
So then they threw their weight behind Marco Rubio. It didn't really work. Then they tried it against Ben Carson, and that almost worked, but not enough. And then Ted Cruz got the last breath. They tried to get behind. And so I can actually understand a lot of the drive behind a lot of Trump's base is like, no, we're going to put an outsider in because we've seen how corrupt you guys are. And we want to go ahead and put an outsider in and have him just smash as much as he possibly can. And we're going to get behind our guy at there's no cost that we're not willing to pay to make this happen, because he was an outsider that represented, and Trump spoke a lot about crushing the corruption within, draining the swamp. And so I actually think that message is one of the main reasons that he got elected from the Republican base, is that he was an outsider going to come in and mess up the system that most people agreed was already corrupt. It's just, what has he actually done is a question you can debate to drain the swamp. But I mean, that was a lot of his appeal initially.
Yeah, and so that's the thing is that you just kind of described it. Trump didn't initially control the Republican Party. He
No.
it he he becomes a clear front runner. Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House at the time, is like, oh God, he's like the nominee. I don't even want to endorse him. Finally, they
Yeah.
all coalesce around him. I should say he takes control,
Yeah.
and now here we are. And you
Yep.
wonder, like, you see that same thing with Bernie Sanders. So many people in the party,
Don't
don't
want him.
necessarily agree with him or align him. If he became the nominee, would he be able to get that kind of control over the party that Donald Trump has? I mean,
I
they're
don't
they're
know.
very similar.
They're very, very similar in the sense that they're anti. So they're similar in the sense of how they ran their campaigns in a way, like and how like
Yes.
the
Yes.
anti-establishment bucking against that. That is very similar. I would love to at some point, maybe we should add a fifth episode to the series about the Donald Trump presidency, but I would love to go into like, yeah, maybe Trump diagnosed the problems correctly, but what has he done to change what he had said was a problem? Has he done anything about that? And of course, I would argue no. I mean, he's governed pretty much like a status quo Republican for the most part, other than his Twitter account and his personal attacks all the time. He's policy wise has been pretty conservative. So I don't really see much that you could make a case for there. But it is interesting how the dynamics of the establishment trying to keep these guys out and them trying to just take control, it has a lot of similarities for sure.
Yeah, and so now you have, Joe Biden and Mayor Pete as kind of the two establishment candidates, and you have Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, but even they have slight differences.
Yeah.
And just the thing that attracts me to Bernie is I don't think I agree with any candidate 100% on things, but
Sure.
he's been hammering the exact same point for like 40 years now.
Yeah, yeah. No, and that's a good point. So this is something I keep coming back to is principles versus the political wins, and it seems to me that Bernie Sanders, whether you disagree or agree with him, he's had the same principles for 40 years for the most part. I mean, and there's something that naturally you trust in someone like that. Even if you kind of disagree with some of their policies, the individual is trustworthy to you because nothing is going to cause him to change his principles at this point, or it would have happened a long time ago.
Right.
And it seems with a lot of the other options you have, and I don't know if Joe Biden would fit into this category, but Mayor Pete damn well fits into this category of someone who just like licks their finger, figures out where the political winds are going, and tries to go that direction. They don't really have a principle they're trying to stand by wholeheartedly. And so there is an appeal of Bernie, in my opinion, that he just seems extremely principled and consistent on what he's been saying.
Right. And so that's the thing is like with politicians who've been around a long time, the Clintons, Biden, Obama, Mitt Romney, I think in 2012, John McCain, these other presidential nominees, Jeb Bush, they all had records, and you go back 5, 10, 15, 20 years and you're like, oh, they said one thing, it's terrible. They said this thing, and they flip-flop. That's not the case. And I would challenge anyone to find another politician in the United States that is not flip-flop for 40 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's impressive. And this is what annoys me is people try to, and part of this I blame on Bernie, so I will go into this a little bit, but people try to lambast Bernie as he's some radical that has these crazy ideas. In reality, I genuinely think all he's done is looked at other countries throughout his throughout his career as a politician. He's looked at other countries who have done things better than us and said, why don't we do it like them? Mm-hmm. And he's been very consistent with that drumbeat. And if you were to take a look at the map and compare us to the top 10 countries that are most similar to us in terms of how they're structured culturally or government wise, almost every issue he stands for, it's being implemented and has been implemented in other countries for a very long time, and it's working. And so when he says, hey, Medicare for all is something we should go for, you look at other countries, they have a similar system to what he's advocating for. And whereas you can criticize it has certain flaws, it's not that it's undoable because it's been done. And you go down the list of his issues, and honestly, most other countries have implemented and found a sustainable way to keep those systems up. And so it's just weird to me how he gets almost cast as like some radical with ideas that have never been implemented and never will work, when you can easily look at other countries that have made it work.
Right. And so that's the thing is like, I don't think he's coming from a point of trying to be radical. I think although he has to, it's coming from a point of this is logical and common sense and it works in all these other places. Why aren't we doing it? Like, why are we not doing all these other things? And that's really the core tenet of what he's been hammering for his entire career.
Exactly. No, and I think most people, there's certain truisms you just learn in life. Money corrupts. It doesn't have to corrupt, but it can corrupt. And when you put money and power in the same hand, that's a deadly combination depending on who has it, And so there's certain truisms you learn throughout life in terms of what is the saying? Absolute power doesn't corrupt, but I can't even remember the saying.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely?
Something like that, So we as culturally have develop truisms around certain things that we found to be true in life. And to me, Bernie is just bringing attention to those things that most people already know. Like, well, of course the politicians are bought by lobbyists. Of course the politicians advocate for certain policies if their backers want them and their donors want them to. I mean, donations by large corporations are in large part just legalized bribery. And so he's saying a lot of things that people just kind of distinctively know. And so I think that's where a lot of the appeal comes from. But he gets cast as a radical. And like you just said, in his mind, it's just common sense based on his view of other countries and how they've been able to do it.
Right.
But he gets cast as a radical because I honestly believe a lot of the higher, you can call him the top 1% special interest, whatever you want to, but he's threatening to disrupt a lot of the system that they hold dear. And I think that the way to combat that is cast him as a radical.
And so this is the thing, is he a Democrat? I mean, he's technically a democratic socialist, I believe, is the term he uses. So first of all, you hear the word socialists, and that just has bad connotations, whether that's fair or not. But I think it's just true that it has a bad connotation.
Absolutely.
And so he's further left in the Democratic Party for sure. He's running for the Democratic nomination because he obviously aligns more with that party than the Republicans. But it's like, if he gets through the primary, which he would win, I think he's a very good chance, then what happens? I mean, can he beat Trump? Did Trump drag him through the mud like he did with Hillary? There's obviously not as much baggage with Bernie.
Yeah.
But how does that label play on a national scale? I mean, it already is in a sense, but it's Bernie or Trump when it gets to that point.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I want to actually go into the first thing you said first, because this is one of my criticisms against Bernie that actually annoys me, and I kind of get why it happens, but it's still annoying, is he's definitely not a socialist. I mean, a socialism in its most basic sense is the government should own the means of production, and he never advocates for that. He said that that's not a system he supports. I mean, as early as like a year and a half ago, he gave a speech and said, no, I just believe in a system that regulates and tax in a way that benefits the masses as opposed to the top percentile. He's like, I don't think the government should be in control of the means of production. So he's not a socialist if you study what a socialist is, he's not that. That's a very easy conclusion to come to. The problem is he has referred to himself as a socialist kind of nonchalantly, and that's what makes it very annoying to me. Is I'm like, look, man, I understand in one sense the Republicans call anything on the left socialism. It doesn't matter what it is. It's socialism, because that's a very effective fear-mongering word. So in one way, I'm sure he's kind of just tired of the whole label in a sense that he's like, look, whatever, call me a socialist, call me democratic socialist, whatever you want to do. I just think these ideas make the most sense, so I'm going to fight for them. So I kind of get that dynamic, but him calling himself a socialist is one of the dumbest moves I can think of that he can do, because it's not true, and two, it is effectively a very bad word to call yourself in the American political scheme, because socialism is a bad ideology. I mean, what I've studied, it seems like it's a very bad ideology. So I don't like that he doesn't separate himself from that word more, but I kind of understand whatever you do, you're going to be called a socialist. So who cares?
So the Democratic Socialists of America define democratic socialism as a belief that both the economy and society should be run democratically to meet public needs, not to make profits for a few. So I think literally the socialist word and they probably need help with their messaging on this, but the socialism in that is a democracy by all the people.
Yeah.
Not an economic philosophy.
Exactly.
But I mean,
very true.
No one's going to accept that. Or, sorry, people on the right are not going to accept that. But then obviously the flip side of that argument is whether the nominee is Joe Biden, Mayor Pete, or Bernie Sanders, a large percentage of the country is not going to vote for that person anyway. Does it matter?
So that's my question, which goes to your second part, which you were asking earlier, is like, let's say Bernie does get the primary. How does that phase out against Trump? There is a large portion of the Republican and conservative base that will never vote for a Democratic candidate anyway. Like, that's just period. I mean, there's no break in that. And likewise, I'd say the Democratic base, there's a large portion of Republicans. So that's just built into the system. But one of the interesting points is, based on polling data, that between out of all the candidates that are running for president now, Bernie is one of the only candidates that I think it's that polls higher than 10%, where when you poll Trump supporters, you say, hey, which Democratic candidate could you see yourself supporting? Bernie and Andrew Yang are the only two that break that 10% threshold where people are like, yeah, I could see my mind being switched with someone like him. But I mean, at the end of the day, is that much? I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
No. So, and if you're not, there is a path for a Mayor Peter or Joe Biden to win where women in the suburban women, quote unquote, can't take Trump anymore. They're rejecting that. Suburban voters, upper middle class Republicans that aren't super far right, vote for a Democratic nominee. But yeah. I think the flip side of that is, do you frighten people off by the word socialist, by some of what Bernie stands for?
Yeah.
And it's tricky. But the thing is, Bernie, I think more than any other candidate, maybe Elizabeth Warren could do this, can bring in a new coalition or a new sect of voters in a way that none of the other members of the top four can. And I think that could be the difference maker.
I definitely agree with that 100%. Actually, I think there's something when you just let Bernie, like, it's funny if you watch Bernie's, he did a YouTube podcast with Joe Rogan several months back.
Yeah,
it's an hour long, and if you look at the comments, overwhelmingly they're like, man, I didn't realize how much of my perception about this guy was just formed by the media and what I've heard about him instead of just listening directly to him. He doesn't actually sound that crazy. Even if I disagree with him, he actually sounds like he's coming from a reasonable place. And so my opinion is, if you let Bernie talk more in a longer format, he starts to win over a lot more voters than someone like Joe Biden, who you let him talk more and he loses voters, in my experience. So
yes,
it is kind of weird. I don't know.
And I think that's the thing, is like when you calculate the built-in percentages of, like, I'm going to vote for I myself literally am going to vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Democrats who are at that point. There's a lot of Republicans that are voting for Trump no matter what.
Yeah.
So you take what's left and then you weigh it. All right. Is it a better strategy to try to flip those moderates, or is it just better to say, whatever happens with them happens. We need to just bring in new voters. There's not enough of those people to flip anyways. Even if we flip half of them, does that number make sense? And I don't know if it does. I don't think it does, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, to me, there's two aspects. One, I personally think, so if you look at polling, Bernie Sanders is overwhelmingly supported the most by, like, the millennial generation or the younger generation, if you will. And so I think that if he gets the candidacy and he wins in the primaries, that you're going to have a very enthusiastic base that are trying to essentially do the equivalence to political converting of anyone they know, and be very loud about their advocacy for Bernie Sanders in a way that it might bring in that new coalition of voters where it does sway it in a way and it has a higher voter turnout than normal. I can easily see that happening. I just don't see any enthusiasm that's going to be behind Joe Biden. And two, I would say, in returns to the moderate voter, I actually appreciate the distinction I can clearly see between a Bernie Sanders type presidency and candidacy versus a Donald Trump presidency. It's two clear choices and two clear directions in my mind. When you go like a Joe Biden versus a Trump presidency and you take away the personalities, right? Just go policy. There's not as clear of a difference to me on that front. And so to me, when you're trying to cater to the moderate center so much, you're almost creating this, like, almost very minor difference between what your options are if you're constantly trying to cater to the moderate between the Democratic candidate and the Republican, is how it feels to me anyway.
So I think, I don't want to defend Joe Biden. However, I think a couple things. Personality matters, I think, just as a representation on the world stage. And that is actually initially one of my concerns with Bernie. Does he feel like someone, like, take away economic stuff, which is really important, but like in a time of crisis, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is he someone that can lead you? And I don't know if I feel that way with Mayor Pete for sure, because he's very intelligent, or even Elizabeth Warren, or Hillary Clinton had that vibe.
Yeah.
So I think that matters. I think policy-wise, strip it down to just Trump's policies, Biden's policies. Obviously, Biden not as far left as Bernie, but I think when you look at things like climate change, tax policy, healthcare, there are differences. It's not necessarily where I would want it to be, but it's closer than where I want it from the Republican side.
Sure.
But again, it's hard you have to take everything with it, and you have to mix it all together.
Yeah.
It can't just be one element.
You do. And Joe Biden is definitely even more far left than Hillary from what I've seen in a lot of ways. So, I mean, I shouldn't cut him short on a lot of issues because
Well,
he does
he's a
have.
neoliberal too.
So, but this gets back to like a fundamental philosophical difference that I have about it, and I could be wrong because I'm still trying to learn as much as I can. So maybe I'm just naive in a sense, but like my view is, if you go to a car dealership and you're trying to buy a car for $15,000, you go in and offer $10,000, knowing you'll compromise at 12,000, whatever, 12,500 in the middle. If you go in and say, hey, my offer is $14,000 for your $15,000 car, you're going to get little to no discount off of that because you've already given up so much ground. And to me, the incremental moderate approach of like Obama and the neoliberal approach, it's very, it seems wise because it's cast as being pragmatic, but in reality, you're just giving up so much ground in the beginning that what you even do accomplish, such as Obamacare, it kind of was a Republican idea in the first place. So there's not a huge distinction between what you're doing and what the Republicans would not necessarily what the Republicans do, but there's just not a lot of ground you make up because you've already given up so much going in because you don't start from a more left position than you should have, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with that completely. I think that's the case. I think the problem is you have to win. And
Yeah.
so for the entire history of our country, especially, at least modern politics, you've had to drift to the center and probably until Trump to have a shot at winning. And so now
When did that start? When do you think that, has that always been the case as far as you've seen, or is that like after Reagan, or is there a poor time period where that became the political norm?
I think just the idea is there's only two choices. You only need to win 51% of the vote. So you just want to offend the least amount of people possible. I think in the era of, 24/7 Twitter and cable news and all that stuff, I think it's different. But I don't think we've ever had a candidate as far to the left or as liberal as Bernie Sanders. And so that's why.
Yeah, Lyndon Johnson would be pretty much the closest you could. Not Lyndon Johnson. I'm sorry, FDR. My bad. I'm sorry.
FDR.
Yeah, and
so
he won.
Was kind of power hungry.
Yeah. See, he is actually on my list to study his presidency because he gets kind of used a lot in the Bernie Sanders circle as a good example to use. And I don't have an opinion on him so much other than what I've seen the bullet points, and the bullet points of him having, I mean, he's won the election 4 times pretty handedly each time, and a lot of the implementation he put in place during his presidency is still into effect nowadays, and it seems to be working pretty well. So he's touted as a success, but honestly, I don't know much about his presidency myself.
Yeah, and I don't want to touch on it too much. Obviously, he has the core packing and the New Deal and kind of, but all his policies didn't really pull the country out of the Depression until World War II. So you could kind of argue that, but
yeah, sure.
You take an economy that's doing relatively okay. You never really had a nominee in the modern era this progressive and as radical, quote unquote, as Bernie. So that's why I hesitate. I was like, okay, I agree with him, but can he win? So all these things I'm saying, like new coalition, like it might make sense in theory, but it's never really been put to the test.
Yeah.
And that would be the thing.
See, but that's a lot of the kind of criticism that was thrown against Trump's way as well.
Right.
We've never had someone that wasn't a politician in the president. Well, we've never had this, we've never had that, and he just bulldozed his way through everything, And I mean, you got to give the guy props in a way. I mean, I think I don't like a lot about Trump's character, but one of the things he is very good at is he's going his way and everyone else is going the highway or joining him on his way. And man, he did overcome quite a bit to become the nominee for the Republican nominee and then to become the president. I mean, he's been a fighter and at his age, for him to fight as much as he fights is pretty impressive in a way. So to me, political norms aren't the status quo, and political norms shouldn't be as heavily valued, in my opinion, as they used to be. It just seems like we're in a different era.
No, yeah, I think this is the beginning of a new era of politics. So that's why, but it's still new. It's untested. Trump's done it, but he's definitely, Bernie's not as brash, I guess, or it's a different
type
he
of
is.
brash.
That's the thing. Is come back. That's, I guess, the takeaway from this podcast is they're similar in their approach.
Yeah.
To a at least campaign sense, but
big time. I think they both hit the same nerve for a lot of people of draining the swamp, fighting corruption. It's rigged against the middle class, and let's go ahead and fight for the working man. A lot of the same themes come out of their campaigns, it seems like.
Right. And so now if we do have a Bernie versus Trump, obviously Trump's now established as
Yeah.
the incumbent, but
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what any situation looks like. I can make an argument that every single nominee loses. You know what I mean? And that's what I lean towards at this point. I'm just so
Yeah.
scared and like balled up in the corner. You know what I mean? So
it is weird. I don't know. Like to me, Bernie stands the best chance at beating Trump, in my opinion, from my perspective, because I think Joe is essentially Hillary 2.0 and just get shredded by Trump, because a lot of Republicans were hesitant about Trump in the first place because they didn't know if he'd govern conservatively, and they didn't know if he'd destroy the economy with his brash style. And neither of those things are shown to be true. And so you're going to have a higher turnout in the conservative base than you did against Hillary. And I don't think that you have a lot of enthusiasm behind Joe Biden to where the turnout will be very different than it was for Hillary in some ways. So I think Joe loses, whereas Bernie could carry the win. And I think when you put Bernie and Trump on a debate stage, a lot of people are going to hear Bernie and be like, well, this guy actually makes some more sense than we realized. Assuming the debates happen in the first place, by the way. Apparently Trump is kind of preconditioning that he might not want to have the debates in the first place.
Really?
Yeah, he tweeted it. It was a couple weeks ago, and basically saying that he loves debates. He's the best debater. There's never one that's a better debater than him. But the way the debates are handled are often rigged in a fake news manner against him. So he might not have time to do the debates if he doesn't want to. Well, he'll go ahead and see. Something like that is what he was saying, basically. So I mean, it's weird, man. I don't know. Next year is going to be a weird year politically. My money is that Bernie could beat Trump for sure, and I think it would actually be a surprising win. But he's got to get the nomination first, which seems like it might not happen. And also, he's going to get everything thrown his way, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think, oh, God. I mean, we're going to cover Elizabeth Warren and Mayor Pete, so it'll be interesting, I think, to flesh out our perspectives on them. But I think at this point, Bernie, I feel fairly, I don't know. I can't even say it. I want to say that he has the best chance of beating Trump. But like I said, my gut tells me that it doesn't matter, that Trump's going to win anyways. But if I had a choice, what
if Trump wins again, what's his kind of like, what are his ideas he runs on? Like building the wall still is something he can run on, I imagine. I just don't really know.
I think it's fear. I think it's not me, them. So the socialists, they're going to take your guns. Look at the economy. I think there's metrics out there that kind of prove the economy's not doing as well as he's going to say it is, but it's certainly not doing visibly badly. And I think that's enough.
Yeah, no, and that is enough. A lot of people look around and they're like, man, everywhere I go, I see a hiring sign, like looking for like new applicants, hiring, almost like businesses are desperate to get people. Like, I mean, I've definitely seen a lot more hiring. So that's a visual sign that signifies the economy is doing well. People don't care that our deficit is increasing higher than any president in our history. Doesn't matter. I see that jobs exist and the economy seems to be doing well. So that's enough for me to support someone like Trump. And in Trump's mind, from my perspective, he's like, look, I'll put everything on credit I possibly can while I'm the president, so that gives the illusion of a good economy. And then when I get out, it can come crashing down. I could care less. And so I do think Trump has the economy to run on in a very strong sense. And I don't know what metrics you really should go by to establish if an economy is going good. Do you focus on the middle class? Do you focus on job creation? Do you focus on the increase in income for I don't really know where you should look, but Bernie seems to have a very different take on the economy than someone like Trump would. So it'll be interesting to see that clash if it happens.
Yeah, there's too many factors. I think it's just such a complicated thing, and that's why when you look at the easy signs are that it's doing well. I think if you want a job, you can get one. I guess. Yeah. I think it comes down to that. If you need a second job, or you want to wait tables, you can go do that. With money, but I would argue it's not doing as strongly as Trump says it is. You're right. And something I think we maybe can touch on as the general election gets closer is, what is Trump going to do if he loses?
Yeah, that'll be an interesting point. What we should do, honestly, I really do think what we should do is so the next episode will be Warren and then Buttigieg. And I feel like the fifth episode should be the Donald Trump presidency, and kind of one, we can talk through his candidacy when he ran or his presidency now, but also, if he loses, what's he going to do? I think that'd be a really good episode to do.
Yeah. Oh God. I don't even want to
Yeah, it's weird. I honestly don't know. I mean, I hate to be that like conspiracy theorist, fear mongering type of individual, and just kind of be more pragmatic and be like, look, if he loses, he loses. It's out. We're gonna move on. But there's no way he doesn't go down without some type of
Yeah,
slinging of mud.
it's not. That's just too easy.
That's too easy. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. Um, at one of these points, we'll have to talk about the impeachment stuff as well, because that's actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's still happening. Think
Yeah.
about all this stuff. He's still getting impeached.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I'm Bernie. So I mean, he is someone I don't think anyone could have pulled me towards the Democratic Party as easily as someone like Bernie did. Not to say I was a Republican before, but he has done a very good job convincing me of structural issues that I never heard anyone else really talking of. So I am a
Right.
fan of Bernie in a lot of ways, but in terms of his electability, if that's going to go in, I don't know. It's hard to tell at this point.
And I think I guess the biggest takeaway is he's been saying the same thing for his entire
Yeah.
career. You know what he stands for. He's principled, and he can build a new set of voters, a new bloc.
Yeah.
And
I
I
definitely
think that's his
agree with that.
appeal.
I agree. Well, Bernie's covered. I don't really have too much more to say on him unless
Yeah.
you have something you wanted to add.
Billionaires are bad.
Speaking of that, I actually just watched a 10-minute video with Warren Buffett. Sorry. Buffett. That's funny. Warren Buffett. Bill Gates and some other billionaire. There is a capitalism versus socialism, question, and they were
I
talking
wonder what
10
they
minutes
think.
on it. Yeah, it was interesting. I actually respected. So Warren Buffett in the beginning, his first answers were kind of annoying, and then Bill Gates talked, and he actually zeroed in on what the actual issue is. He's like, I don't really think a lot of people are for socialism. He said, I think a lot of people are against the abuses that have happened within capitalism and how there needs to be more effective tax rates and regulations in place so that it helps the bottom people more than it does now. And so he says, I think that's where the frustration comes in, because I haven't studied the issue in depth, but I fail to see a scenario in which I don't become very heavily supportive of free markets and capitalism to an extent, as long as you have the necessary regulations in place with an emphasis on helping out the less fortunate in the country. So that's kind of where I fit right now. But it was interesting hearing them comment on on capitalism and socialism and what their takes on it were, to say the least. It was funny.
Yeah, they're always going to be, and that's not that. Warren Buffett's pretty liberal for a billionaire. But
Yeah, he ended the video with some really good points. I mean, he said, like, look, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he did end the video with some very interesting points. He's like, there's just not a lot of buying power or capital that the bottom part of this country has to throw their weight around as effectively as someone like a billionaire does. So I can see how a lot of frustration comes from that and seeing how the system might be rigged against them in some ways. And so he had some really interesting insights on it, but it was so weird because the person who's doing the interview said, well, what's the solution to this? And none of them really provided a substantive answer. It was kind of annoying to me. I was like, to me, a 2-year-old can identify an issue in our system, or not a 2-year-old, but someone. I mean, it's not hard to identify what the issues are. The part that frustrates me is when someone comes forward and says these are the solutions, like Bernie does. It's like, that's too radical. We can't do any of that. And it's like,
so what's your
what's your solution? It's like the Republicans on healthcare. Their only position on healthcare is to disagree with whatever the Democrats do. They don't have a solution, and that's just frustrating. But yeah. So that's all I got for Bernie. So next week will be Elizabeth Warren, who as of now looks like has little to no shot of getting the nomination. Based on
she fell off the wagon there.
I heard a little, and we'll by the time we do next episode, we'll probably know more because the donations and fundraising data should be released. But apparently she didn't have a very good fourth quarter from what I've heard.
And I bet Bernie and Pete did.
Did you see, speaking of Pete, did you see how he sent out an email, or his campaign sent out an email having contests who can donate the least amount to his campaign to all his supporters? Because he has such a high average. Yeah, he has such a high average because he has like he's the number one candidate, him and Joe Biden, of billionaires that have donated. And there's a lot of people that have donated to him who like high dollar amounts. So his campaign is trying to get their average down by emailing supporters to donate the least amount that they can so it looks better on paper. I mean, just absolute nonsense, man. So crazy.
That's a good one. I
And
did
then
not see that, but I'm not surprised.
on top of that, he sent out an email that said his campaign sent out an email that said, "Hey, it was to like high dollar people. It said, "Hey, you guys need to get in now so you can have basically a seat at the table before he starts winning all these new primaries." And, basically all the seats at the table are already filled, and he's already kind of chosen who he's willing to let influence his decisions. And I'm putting a spin on it, but essentially he said, donate now while he can see that you're a true believer in his campaign instead of waiting to donate later where he already knows who the true believers are, is essentially how it was read. And it's
True
so
believers.
crazy.
Yep, that sounds about right.
But yeah, it just shows you that he's such a man. I do not like Mayor Pete. I was intrigued by him initially, but I am not a fan of him anymore.
I know you don't.
All right, man. Well, I don't have anything else to say until next week.
I think this covers it.
Boom. Done.
All right.